Good morning, everybody. This is our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee work session, December 6th. We do have two items, and they are both have to do with either acquisition and also another item that has to do with council office building renovations, which is required given that the council will be expanding from 9 members to 11 members. So we're going to begin with our first item, which is a special appropriation to the FY22 capital budget and amendment to the FY21 to 26 capital improvements program, also known as the CIP, for Montgomery County Government Department of General Services regarding 260 East Jefferson Street acquisition. This is the amount is $3,600,000, and it would come from general obligation for bonds. Today we do have Mr. Dice and Mr. Osant. Also listed was Ms. Mary Beck, but we're gonna turn it over to Mr. Mia, our legislative analyst, that prepared the packet for us to go over the specifics of this particular proposal for this acquisition, and then we'll engage in a conversation with Mr. Dice, Mr. Osant, and whoever else is here present to give us some information. With that, let me turn it to Mr. Mia.
Good morning. The executive is proposing special appropriation for $3.6 million to acquire this piece of property. It is about 4.43 acres, a little less than half an acre in size, with a 2-story building totaling about 5,500 square feet. It used to be the home of the PNC Bank, as well as a law office on the second floor. There are about 20 surface parking spaces on the property, and in the short term, the executive is proposing to move certain DOT functions to this property, including the Taxi Cab Services Commission and the Commuter Services Service right now, which are in the executive office building. So these would be moved to the new property, the new acquisition. And there's some convenience with the relocation. Currently, visitors who are driving to these services would have to park in the Rockville core, pay for parking, either metered parking, garage parking, and then go up to the EOB. With this acquisition, they could simply park on site in a surface parking space and go into the building and carry out their function and then leave. So there is some benefit with the relocation. However, I believe the long-term possibilities of acquiring the site are more compelling. As we know, in 2008, there was a study that proposed relocating the council office building to the site. Since that study, we've obviously renovated extensively the council office building. So, but there are other possibilities of using the site to build a new building, to consolidate currently leased space within the Rockville area. We have 33,000 square foot of lease space at the Family Justice Center on 600 Jefferson. Further down the pike, we have DHCA and HHS occupying some lease space. So there is some, I think, long-term benefit, which is obviously years, even decades away, possibly. But I think at this point, I think DGS can speak to some of those possibilities and give us some more information on what could be done on the site.
Great. And Mr. Mia, respectfully, I will just say that my perspective on the extensive renovation of the COB is a little different. I'm not sure that it was an extensive renovation, but it was definitely needed.
Right.
Nonetheless, it still remains a building with a lot of challenges and a lot of areas that are definitely in need of some type of help. But I just wanted to just clarify that. Mr. Dice, anything you can add regarding this acquisition?
Well, I'll just start by saying I think you're moving over into the next item after this. But,
it's all connected here. All these things are connected, as Mr. Mia pointed out.
Yeah, the site obviously is strategic importance for the long-term interests of the county. I think Mr. Mia's packet is pretty thorough in addressing the immediate benefits, which are not insignificant. The opportunities to have DOT use this building until such time as the site is developed further are not unimportant. I think they offer a great deal of interest to the public using those services. But the long-term interests of the county are benefited by having ownership of this site and control of it, not only for what it means to the overall government complex. I noticed Mr. Mia's comments about occupancy of buildings and the like, and DGS is in fact working on consolidating our footprint as telework becomes a new normal. We're actually using that initiative to, over the long term, to move operations out of leased facilities into county-owned buildings. But one of the things that we lack is flex space to be able to do long-term major strategic initiatives. Having control of this property will enable us to do that. We are in fact looking in the relative near term at a major renovation to the executive office building. Now, the council office building has been successfully renovated, Ms. Navarro. The executive office building is not far behind that. And being able to have the opportunity to have space to construct or operate, flexibility in moving offices around is going to be helpful along those lines. So I think the value of the property is a fair price given the market. Just so the council knows, we have informed the city of Rockville of our intent to purchase this property subject to council's appropriation, and got a favorable response from the city to that end. So unless Mr. Assant wants to add anything else, I think that's sufficient.
No additions, thank you.
Any comments or questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Rice? Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate the work on this and appreciate the packet. I think it does go into detail. I agree that the long-term interests, seem to supersede the near term, but obviously understanding what those are is helpful. And I do think that we ought to be thinking long-term about the county's public resources and assets to make sure that we can meet the needs. So that strategically makes sense to me. I would be helpful to understand whether or not you noted the lease space and the movement to telework. Are we going to be moving facilities in here that would allow us in the near or medium term to reduce lease space, or is that part of a broader rethinking of the county's offices in order to address teleworking and the changing dynamics of the workplace and the needs of county government? I just wasn't clear as to what that was.
I guess the answer to both questions is yes. We are first and foremost focused on reducing the county's leased office footprint as a cost-saving measure to reduce long-term lease costs. As you know, we spend almost $20 million now a year on leasing office space, and to be able to reduce that. And we have begun that process, and we can provide a report to the committee if you're interested. We have begun that process. It is a long-term, probably a 10-year process, because obviously we have leases out there that we don't want to terminate before term. So as leases expire, we are reducing footprints or looking at moving those operations into county-owned space. The good news is that telework is successful. We have people commuting less. We are heating and cooling buildings less, and so our environmental footprint is greatly improving as we do this. So it's sort of parallel benefits of both the lessening our environmental impact, getting cars from commuters off the road, as well as saving money on lease space. So Short term, we've just begun. Greg and his team are doing the analysis. But as you know, when we go out for negotiating leases, we do negotiate longer periods in order to get more favorable terms. So we want to see those terms expire, and as they do, we are moving folks around. Greg might be able to give us a couple of anecdotal examples of what we've done so far. But as I said, this is a strategy we're mapping out as departments are looking at sort of hybrid versions of telework and return to work. One of the strategies that we're chiefly investing in is hoteling, so that there's no reason if I've got people coming in twice a week and teleworking 3 days a week, they don't need to have a dedicated office. They can share that space with others who are teleworking and coming into work different times. So you can imagine this logistic challenge in coordinate between offices and departments, but that is the process that we've started on. Greg, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. As David mentioned, the short answer is, of course, yes. And as Naeem has pointed out in the packet, there are a couple 100,000 square feet of leased space in proximity to the Rockville core, between 1401 Rockville Pike, the Family Justice Center, and some other locations. So even though this particular location is only a few thousand square feet and will host a DOT use in the interim, that certainly gives DOT the flexibility to get the highest and best use out of that vacant space that they'll be sitting on in the EOB, and of course might play into the future renovations of the EOB. So it is a piece of the puzzle, Mr. Friesen, but it is we are planning, as David mentioned and alluded to, much bigger moves in the market for years to come, and so this is certainly a piece of the puzzle.
Appreciate it. Long term, I'll just make a plug that if there's an opportunity for co-location either at this site or relocated facilities to this site for co-locating affordable housing. I know we've talked a lot about that. I think we need to do a lot better than what we're doing. I think this provides us a strategic opportunity to think about that. And so you're required by law to consider it, but I hope that it will not just by law, but by practice and by effort, really be at the forefront of how you're looking at these facilities and how we can maximize the use, because it's not just about the services that we're providing on a day-to-day basis. It's about helping residents and filling the gaps that exist in the community to support the county's priorities. And certainly affordable housing is chief among those. So I just wanted to make that plug here. We're at the early stages. A lot of times we wait until too late, and then it's hard to figure out. And so before you're even contemplating what this site is going to look like and what is going to be housed there, I certainly hope that housing people is at least part of that consideration at the forefront. So I just want to make that plug. Thank you.
That and childcare are always considerations that we undertake when we look at new facilities. So yes.
We appreciate it. I think the chair was going to probably jump on the childcare on top of housing as two chief priorities. So I'll yield back, but appreciate her leadership and appreciate your efforts there.
No, absolutely. That was exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, I was going to invoke my good friend, Councilmember Florine, since we both worked together on making sure that there was a requirement to assess for childcare as well. And it's such an important point that Councilmember Friesen makes. I mean, you guys know this better than anybody else, that we really do have quite a bit of challenges when it comes to public facilities, and there's no doubt that co-location is the way to go early on. It's really important thing to consider as well. So that is spot on. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've often been told that you can't grow any more land, and that's exactly what we have in this situation. Of all of the pieces of property in the Rockville core, this is perhaps one of the most strategic of what we have. And I agree with everything that's been said. We certainly should have many good, open, transparent discussions on what should go there. But the most important thing is that we get the piece of property. And it became, for years, I've thought, and as did many others, that it was surprising that the county didn't own that piece of property. The passing of the owner has allowed for this to go on the market. And I think that we need to purchase it without question. And then from there have the short term makes sense, but then the long term certainly makes even more sense. And how many times have you gone to the county executive building and seen people that are parking in that lot, though the sign says you shouldn't, to go into the county executive building? And of course, everybody thinks those signs are for everybody else rather than themselves. But this certainly would allow for some parking for something in a very short term for the county executive, as well as, there's so many people that don't realize that the county owns the circuit court building. And that also is a part of this. So anyway, I'm very much supportive of purchasing this piece of property. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. All right, so I think that what I'm hearing is that without objection, we will approve so that this can go to full council, the purchase of this particular property, given all the strategic, obviously, location and all of the other policy goals that we might be able to fulfill. So I think it's a great opportunity for sure. All right. Now, moving on to item number 2, and this is a special appropriation to the county government's FY22 capital budget and amendment to the FY21 to 26 capital improvements program for $3,600,000 for council office building renovation for the 11-member council. This is the same amount as the last one, right? Yeah, I kept checking my notes. Like,
We're on a roll.
that's a lucky number, I guess. 3,600,000. All right. So for this particular item, we do, of course, have Mr. Giles, Mr. Son, Ms. Beck, Anita IRT, and also we have Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez, who prepared a packet for us, Mr. Mia, and I also see Mr. Craig Howard. So let me turn it over to Ms. Hernandez, and you can walk us through this particular item, and then we'll engage in a conversation with everybody that is here today.
Thank you. Good morning, council members, and good morning to the DGS and OMB staff who are here as well. Thank you for participating in this agenda item. As Chair Navarro mentioned, we do have this appropriation request that funds necessary and important projects related to the change to an 11-member council as approved by county voters in the November 2020 County Charter Amendment. There are a lot of details, a lot of sub-projects associated to this appropriation amount, so bear with me as I go through each of them for your information as well as the public's. And Mr. Mia can also provide additional information onto the breakdown of the PDF that you'll see on Circle page 3 between planning, design, and construction costs if necessary. So as you all recall, in March 2021, the council approved an FY21 supplemental appropriation and FY21 to 26 CIP amendment for the council office buildings renovation project that provided planning and initial construction cost estimates for the highest priority projects related to the 11-member council change, which included the 2 new council member suites and the subsequent relocation of our Legislative Information Services office. That appropriation provided $92,000 in new funding and reappropriated $408,000 in existing appropriation within the COB project. Today's request does 2 main things. One, it provides the final construction, infrastructure, and furniture and equipment costs for the 2 new council member suites and the relocated LIS office. It's important for this funding to be considered now to avoid any delays in the construction and completion schedule as the new council will begin their term in December 2022. The second thing that this appropriation attempts to do is provide total funding for 4 additional key sub-projects related to the 11 council member change. That includes a new clerk's table in the 3rd floor hearing room, staircase remediation, digital signage throughout the council office building, and as well as remediation and reuse of the former cafeteria/kitchen and seating lounge space on the 2nd floor. By considering this appropriation now, staff can move forward on additional key planning and design elements that can only be considered with an architect and design firm, as well as help create a construction schedule and completion schedule in a timely manner for each of the project related to the new council starting their term in December 2022. So now I'll go through each item. The first two, of course, is the in-progress renovations, which include the 2 new council member suites and relocated LIS suite. For the new LIS suite, the 6th floor Patuxent conference room will be converted into this new suite, including workroom space for the staff. The appropriation includes approximately $70,000 in new funding to complete construction, as well as provide any furniture and infrastructure needs. The packet that council staff provided includes more details on each of the renovations. So for example, LIS will have a new secure greeting counter for the public interactions, as well as modified window shades and things like that. A new secure door, lighting fixtures, and furniture relocations are also included in the prior appropriation. I will note before I continue that the appropriation amount includes as well contingency funding based on DGS's estimates and evaluation of increasing construction cost trends that we're seeing in all construction sectors right now. So the funding elements are broken down in the packet as well, but I wanted to state that before I continued moving on with all of the projects. The second item, the LIS suite has already begun construction on the 6th floor, and construction is expected to conclude by the end of February. So the 2 new council member suites are being placed in what will be the converted LIS copier, workroom, and office suite on the 4th floor. The offices will include similar square footage and design as the current existing 5th floor council member offices. However, a major difference includes the pocket door between the chief and council member's office. It'll be reinforced soundproof swing door, which reduces construction costs and time, but also affords more privacy between the 2 offices, a better sound barrier. This funding includes remaining construction costs, furniture and equipment, as well as infrastructure needs. So the next 4 projects are related to, again, the 11-member council change for December 2022, and attempts to include the total funding for each project as well as contingency. The first is the new clerk's table, which will be placed on the left side of the dais in the 3rd floor hearing room when you're viewing it from the audience perspective. And due to the 11-member council, space on the dais has been reduced. So we'll be able to fit the 11 members as well as 2 staff members, such as the executive director, senior legislative attorney. So this table is necessary for the clerks to be able to perform their job duties and responsibilities. And that approximate total cost is around $18,000. The second is staircase remediation. So the current stairwells in the council office building have extensive code compliance issues that need to be addressed. And this will also include some just basic interior renovations, such as paint. Majority of the cost for this construction has already been appropriated. However, due to the escalating construction costs that we've been seeing, additional funding is necessary, at approximately $200,000 to finish this project. The third is digital signage. So this appropriation includes funding for 10 digital signage units, as well as any construction and TEBS work that needs to be included to provide the public, guests, and staff, especially with the return to in-person council and committee sessions in the future, to be able to navigate the building and also follow live work sessions as they occur. And finally is the 4th project, which is the remediation and reuse of the former cafeteria and kitchen space. So during our last committee session in March on the COB renovations projects, the committee emphasized and supported the need to evaluate the cafeteria and kitchen space for future use by staff, the public, and the community. At this time, the current cafeteria and kitchen space has severe code compliance issues, rendering it unusable. However, we wanted to include funding for this project for designs that include conference room spaces, as we'll be losing the 6th floor Patuxent conference room with the relocation of LIS, seating lounge space, and some sort of food provision format. The council has not reviewed the tentative designs at this point. However, due to high cost needs, such as the code compliance issues, as well as the replacement and renovation of necessary system equipment, we've included funding for this project at this time. So on pages 5 and 6, you will see the breakdown in funding between the sub-projects, as well as updates to the prior renovation projects that had been occurring before the announcement of the change to an 11-member council. And Mr. Mee and I are happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. And of course, we have our DGS and OMB team here as well. Thank you.
So just to recap, it's important for the public to understand. So this particular request includes some elements from the ongoing renovation to the building, the council building, because, you know, unfortunately, it was a very dated building. And when we had these conversations about trying to make some updates and to renovate in some sort, it was clear that, you know, our residents really deserved to come into a building that was healthy, that was safe, and that, you know, had the necessary upgrades to be able to do the work of, I would say, 21st century. I mean, it was a very dated building with lots of issues. Bathrooms were in horrible condition. We would always get feedback around these issues. So it includes some of that, correct?
Yes.
And as well as accommodating the 2 new council members, which that particular decision that the voters made means that there had to be an assessment of exactly where to place the council members, how to modify things like the hearing rooms and things like that. And that has also then allowed for some, I guess, opportunities to redesign some of these other issues, such as the cafeteria, for example. And then when you were describing the cafeteria, Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez, are you saying that there's only design money in here for that, or is it for the full project that needs to be taken care of because of the code issues, et cetera?
Yes, it attempts to include both funding for both items. However, we do note, of course, based on the decision the council makes of what the final design looks like, additional funding might be necessary in the future. But this is also a longer term project due to the nature of it and the construction needs based on equipment and compliance issues. So it will be a longer term project and will have a later completion date. So yes, it does try to include both the system needs, compliance needs, as well as design funding.
Okay. And Mr. Dice, do you have any sense of a ballpark figure for, you know, making sure that the cafeteria is in compliance, making sure it also has the necessary space? The community also uses that space a lot. And so we don't want to lose that, because the building really doesn't have any other space of that nature for community members to come. You know, sometimes they want to have larger meetings, or they want to have a rally, or they want to come together during public hearings and have a little, you know, gathering there. Do you have any sense of that timeline and that cost?
Well, I believe on page 6 of your packet, there's a breakdown of the costs. The line item for remediation and reuse of former cafeteria space of around $3 million captures our estimate of the costs to do that. So yes, this figure does include that cost. Much depends on how that space is reused. In fact, as you just outlined the possible reuses of that, it illustrate how it really does bear some additional and increased scrutiny. If you wanted, for instance, a larger area for groups to rally before coming to the council chambers, or just communities to have larger spaces, that would be one use of that space. If we were to turn that into a mini conference center with multiple conference rooms of different size, that would be a separate or other use of that space. And then again, the type of food service operation, if there is one, would argue for a space. So this figure is based upon a full-on restoration in some small conference areas. Anything that we would do otherwise will be at or under that amount. So this is our best guess. Most of this has to do with taking out the existing equipment, and whatever else we do there would require some significant HVAC work. The last thing you want is to have conference rooms that are stuffy without adequate airflow. So the short answer to your question, Councilmember Navarro, is yes, this is our estimate for that work, but what that work ultimately is as yet undefined.
Okay, because I mean, I'm sure that, whatever multi-purpose flex type of space configuration we can accomplish, obviously the better it would be, because as I said, there are multiple uses there. Obviously, it is important to have some food there. I mean, council sometimes is in session and we're there for whatever. We just had a 13-hour day the other day. So if we were in the building, most of the time you just want to stay there. Community members come in, other folks from the area, the court, they come in. So it's just a very active space, and I think there's some opportunities there. Let me turn to Ms. Beck, and then I'll turn to my colleagues.
Yeah, I did just want to mention, I think as we were talking with DGS, one of the things that is not included in those numbers, as I understand it, is replacement of equipment for the food service. And that's partly because we really don't know what's envisioned. So there definitely are things that are unknown. I mean, I think everyone agrees all but the former cafeteria space has got to happen soon. The former cafeteria space, there's still a lot to figure out, I think, and council's direction on that will probably come in stages. So,
okay, thank you. All right, colleagues, questions, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, you said it so well that this is, I've always considered this to be the public's building. And candidly, I think each and every one of us was embarrassed that this was the public's building. I mean, we can start from the bathrooms, and there were embarrassments. I mean, Air Public was not being treated the way that we want Air Public to be treated when they came to be in this building. And the fact that our own buildings were not within code compliance, there again, I think over the time, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like 5 different buildings and additions, and everything was knitted together, and they did a good job for what they did, but over time it deteriorated and it became really just in many ways a disgusting building for what we were doing. And so if the government can't be within code compliance, who should we tell someone to be in it? They can turn to us and say, well, look at your own building. My building's better off than your building. I mean, so we needed to do all of this. This building needs to remain, that it's accessible, that it's safe, that it's comfortable, and that the public is invited, that they are a part of what we do. So I think that we need to spend the money necessary. I mean, nobody wants to spend millions of dollars, but we need to spend the money necessary. The hearing rooms, let's face fact, the sound system. I mean, we can start down the list. The sound systems were poor. I mean, we just needed to do all of this. And as far as the cafeteria, I agree that we do have to figure out what it should do. There should be, in my opinion, some food service there. It certainly needs new equipment and new things that I think in this day and age, people lease equipment. I don't know how all of that works, but I think we need to do what we need to do to get to the point that we should have the discussion about where the cafeteria will end up. And you're certainly right. I mean, this is a building that you'd sit in there and you'd see people who were from the court system and from the city of Rockville and other places as well. It wasn't just for the people in this building. So I am very much in favor of getting us moving along, continue to get us to move along so that this building can be something that we are not embarrassed about, but sincerely proud about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Mr. Howard, what are the conversations, how are the conversations going in terms of this notion of what that cafeteria space would be, and how is that being informed by council members and other stakeholders?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we've had some initial discussions with DGS about what different options could be. And so we did that because we wanted to get to this, the number of what an appropriate amount would be that would allow the council to consider all the different options and then choose whatever, whatever you felt was the best path moving forward, which is where the $3 million came from. So we think this gives us the sufficient amount of funding to move forward with providing the council with different options and getting input on what are the most important features for the reuse of that space in terms of food availability. We've had multiple discussions about the format and style of different conference rooms, because of course we'll be losing one conference room with LAS moving up to the Patuxent conference room. So we want to make sure that there is space for conference rooms just for internal office meetings, as well as you mentioned for public use, because that is a highly used public area. So a long answer to that question is that we're developing different options that we can then share with the council for input in conjunction with DGS and what they think is feasible and viable. And we think that this appropriation amount gives us sufficient funding to move forward with those different options.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Peterson, Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask a similar question just about both what has happened and what the timing would be, both in the decision-making process for what that looks like and also the funding requirements, because if we're talking about equipment and other capital costs, then we're obviously going to have to appropriate funds in order to make that happen. So as soon as that picture becomes clear, it'd be helpful for us to just be updated along the way. I don't know that we necessarily need to have meetings for that, but just written updates I think would be just helpful for us to have the situational awareness to understand how things are moving forward. Mr. Dice, were you looking to weigh in here?
Yes, with council's approval, the chair's approval, I'll just give some background to that. We're ready to go with the council expansion for the new council members. This is designed and we're ready to go. We realize we're really playing a beat the clock game here because the time requirements to have this fit and ready. Relative to the cafeteria conference space, as Ms. Beck pointed out, it does not include the actual equipment such as stoves or cook surfaces and the like, because again, depending on how this is used, typically if it was a full kitchen setup, the vendor would provide that equipment based upon the service they provide and the type of equipment they desire. This is the same thing we do in the EOB. If it's something less, let's say a grab and go situation, or even at the very low end of it, a vending situation, then the county would be apt to purchase equipment. So a lot of it depends on what that ends up being. That if it's anything less than a full service kitchen, the equipment's really not that expensive. So I don't think it's going to be a major issue. The only other thing I'll add is every effort to operate a full service food service operation has required a lot of subsidy and has ultimately been unsuccessful. So we would promote something more like a grab and go, light deli type situation, in which case we can work with potential operators and talk about costs, but that sort of equipment is not significant and doesn't require major HVAC things like the vent hoods that would be required with a full cook surface area. So again, that decision, which is not necessarily needed immediately, Clearly, again, the immediate requirement is to get the council offices and suites ready for the next year. But these other decisions are not unimportant, but are less urgent.
What's the timing of what, I understand you're kind of viewing it as two separate but related issues in the in the second floor space. I'll call it the second floor public space. There's the kind of meeting area where lots of folks eat their lunch and might meet before they go to a council session or in between council session. And then there's the cafeteria, part of that. Obviously, there's some further decisions that have to be made about the extent of the food service area and what that looks like. There's a public space aspect. Is there a timing of when the public space aspect would be ready for folks to use for any changes that are being made versus the food service?
Well, that's a good question. The designs that we have developed for that space, if you think of the street side of that facility of two street sides, that's the conference areas would be the food services in the back. We do have designs for those that can be implemented in advance of a later decision for the type of food service. I have to talk with my staff on how those mechanical improvements would work. Again, the chief aim there is both fire protection and airflow. So we don't want to end up with two separate systems if we can avoid that, because that just adds to cost. But we could create the conference area, the gathering space, in advance of the future kitchen/food service area. I'd have to talk to staff to see exactly what that would look like as mechanical improvements, but that sort of thing goes up pretty quick. It's not really a concern, and depending on when council reconvenes and the need for those spaces is accentuated, we can work on that. But so yes, the conference area could be done in advance of any food service decisions that come later. That would be the least costly part, pending what mechanical improvements we need to make.
Appreciate that. Well, for you and council staff, could you keep us updated on the timing of those decisions? I think it would be helpful. Obviously, it seems like it's a little bit of a work in progress at this point, but you need the funding to be able to move to the next step, which I can understand and appreciate. I share the view of colleagues that this is a public building. We happen to be fortunate enough to work here, but this is not our building, and so we need to think about it as a place for the public to gather and convene, and it should be safe, it should be welcoming, it should be a place where they want to speak to us and address their grievances and do all of the things that we're trying to encourage them to do. And so we need to make sure that we make the investments that are appropriate and necessary to do that. Question related to that: what is the plan with the first floor? The building doesn't start at the second floor; it starts at the first floor. If folks park in the garage, they enter in the first floor, not in the second floor. We've changed around the entrances, but that is the gateway into the legislative building of the county. And we've heard a lot of comments about how the renovation is done, and I'm not sure that many residents who enter the first floor would might think that. So I just wanted to get a sense for what, if any, plans there are for further changes, cosmetic improvements, safety improvements, anything that's necessary at that first floor.
Well, the improvements to the council office building are effectively complete. The first floor entrance there off of the garage and that alley access, the entrance lobby there is improved. Of course, the auditorium you would not recognize. It is vastly improved. The security station in the back is still there. And we have done a number of cosmetic improvements. One of the challenges with the council office building, the first floor entrance, the utility space overhead is short. So we did not come in and put in a finished ceiling there. It would shorten it even more and feel more pentagonish than it already does. So we did do some cosmetic improvements. Of course, the elevator lobbies and the elevators themselves are vastly improved. And we've done as much on the first floor public entrance area as we felt that we could. There's just an awful lot of space crammed up into that ceiling area that that can't be dealt with without even more cost. And I'm not exactly sure how that could be done. It would be pretty significant. So throughout the building, and if you have not been in the building, we could certainly be happy to walk it with you. But there's the improvements to the council office building, with the exception of the stairwells that are part of this item, is effectively complete.
I'm in the building, so.
You are. Look at that.
I
Yes,
appreciate it. I'm here pretty much every day. But so I get a good sense of it, but feel free to stop by and happy to walk around with you. Anytime I will wear my mask and walk the facility with you. Okay, last question. This is perhaps for council staff, but I was just a little confused as to the furniture aspect of the new council members. Traditionally, at least when I joined, the furniture was part of the individual council member budget. And if you kept something that was already here, it was like a donation. But if you wanted to purchase something new, it came out of a set budget. It seems, including furniture in this item, and I understand LIS has to change their size, and so that probably changes, what furniture is required there. But I was not clear, considering the new council members are not going to be on board until December, and what the need for furniture for council member offices there would be prior to June 30th, which it seems that this is for. So if you could just explain that, it'd be helpful.
Yes, of course. So I think, one of the main concerns is the delays in delivery of furniture. So we wanted to include the funding here now so that there was no delay by December. We were completely unsure of when we could receive the furniture when purchased. Secondly, these offices do not have existing loaner furniture. This funding appropriation would include base furniture of a desk, a chair, and for the bullpen staff and for the council member and chief of staff offices. So it's really just base furniture that we were not able to procure through existing resources of furniture and equipment. So that's where the funding need comes from that.
Is there not base furniture that exists in the council office building or in the rest of county government now? Like, we don't have any storage of any furniture anywhere? I remember when I was moving in here, when there was a transition, there was a bunch of furniture on the second and first floor that was waiting to be moved to an undisclosed location, so to speak. I don't know if that gets donated because we just don't have space to hold it, and then we have to purchase new, or if not, I understand the supply chain constraints, certainly, and obviously we don't want people, sitting crisscross applesauce on a yoga mat, in order to do the people's business. And I'm not suggesting that, but it just would seem if we're purchasing furniture now, and then some new council members may be coming in, or existing council members who want to change their furniture, have different staff that have different preferences, that we would then be buying new furniture 6 months later. I wasn't sure how that was going to work.
Well, while we do have some furniture in storage, surplus furniture, we no longer have an Indiana Jones-like warehouse full of excessive furniture. So the supply is significantly less, and not all of that is is of the highest quality. That's why this issue has been brought up here. Greg, did you have any additional clarity on that? Because you've looked at that inventory.
Yeah, we've looked at the inventory recently, and it is diminished, to say the least, as Director Dice has noted. But I think part of the response to your question, Mr. Friedson, probably needs to come from council staff, because a lot of the preferences and furniture, in particular chairs and things of that nature, that are very personal in terms of the staff and the future council members, would be reviewed and approved by the executive director and her staff as an appropriation request, and really their call in terms of whether we're using surplus furniture or purchasing new, and the timing of those types of things. You make an excellent point. I just don't know that DGS would be the decision maker in that process.
Yeah, I'll jump in for just a second. I think the concerns expressed were correct, that there would not be sufficient surplus or extra furniture to have to outfit, even at a base level for the new council members when they come in. And so we wanted to make sure that when folks did come in, there was the availability of at least the basic necessity type of desks and chairs and things like that. As we work with council members, the new council members who are elected and existing council members, in terms of where folks will be in offices, we'll certainly work with the furniture needs through that process and make sure we're not purchasing anything that is unnecessary.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I just seemed odd to do it, 6 months earlier. I understand the concern here and just want to avoid, either requiring somebody to have furniture that they didn't, that they didn't request, that doesn't serve the needs that they want, or in purchasing furniture and then 6 months later replacing it with additional new furniture. Both don't seem like a great approach. So anything we could do to avoid that and figure out a way to make sure that it's perhaps something that could be used in a different space, but could be used here for a temporary period of time until those issues can be addressed, et cetera. I think that would be, helpful. Also looking at the old LIS furniture, if it's just a placeholder for supply chain issues, just something to take a look at. So appreciate that. Appreciate all the work here. I hope that at some point we can make some improvements to the first floor. I do think that is an entryway for the public. I don't go there very often, if ever. So this is not about my preferences, but I am always concerned when our 5th floor looks nice and the 3rd floor conference room is renovated and looks nice, and the 7th floor looks nice, places where we work, but the places where the public are asked to enter and to frequent are not as nice. And I think it sends a really poor message to the public. This is their building. We should be focused on them, and we should be secondary, not the other way around. And so I just hope that in the decisions that we make and the renovations that we undertake and the improvements that we look at for the building, that it's always about the public first and making this as welcoming, safe and habitable of a building as possible for them, recognizing, of course, that there are a lot of hardworking folks who work here on behalf of the public, and we need to serve their needs as well. So thanks, appreciate it.
Great. Great comments. I think now we're at a point to make a decision. I think that without objection, I think I'm hearing that we understand the need for these funds, and obviously a lot of issues to take into account given the supply chain issues and challenges. So it is wise to get started as soon as possible. So I think without objection, this committee will approve these funds and send it over to the entire council. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I believe that completes our work today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
This time of year. And right now in the United